Hello, I'm Dave Gentry. Welcome to another episode of Small Stocks, Big Money. For those of you new to the show, RedChip is an investor relations, media, and research firm focused on smaller cap companies. Our unique platform combines global multimedia with traditional investor relations, reaching investors around the world. We have represented companies like Celsius, Perfumania, U.S. Steel. These are historical RedChip clients. And we represent about 70 companies a year, mostly on the New York Stock Exchange or NASDAQ. Today's show features interviews with the executives of two small cap companies. First up, we have Unusual Machines on the New York Stock Exchange. This is a company that makes drone goggles and drone parts. Then we have ENLIVEX Therapeutics, a biotech company listed on the NASDAQ. This company reprograms macrophages in order to fight off immune disease. Now, before we get to the first interview, our quote of the week comes from my book, Small Stocks, Big Money. And I quote, "Do your homework. Understand companies you invest in forwards and backwards." This quote comes from chapter 8 of my book, an interview with Charles Diker, an investment manager, Diker Management. You can get a copy of my book on Amazon, a digital copy for only $18, or you can order it from our office at 1-800-RED-CHIP. Now let's go to the interview. Alan, thanks for being with us today.
I appreciate it, Jay. Thanks for having me.
Congratulations on your IPO to the New York Stock Exchange.
Thanks. No, excited about it. It's just the start.
I'm excited too. You're addressing a $17 billion market just in drone parts, which you're a manufacturer of drone parts, and you have a division that manufactures, sells drones. Give us an overview of the technology in the company and your vision for the company.
No problem. I think the technology is a little different. If you think about the drone industry, everybody talks about the AI or the cameras or whatever else. But what you're seeing, especially in the US, is nobody's trying to build the motors, the props, the pieces that make it go. And that's really where, in first-person view, which is all the goggles and the hobbyists and the things you're seeing in like the Ukraine-Russian conflict, it's all those mid-tech pieces that require manufacturing excellence and everything else. And that's really where our focus is on almost the boring stuff, like the stuff that isn't part of the flash and the hype right now, but really the very underrepresented part of the market.
So what kind of parts then? Give us some examples.
So the goggles that people wear, right? They're very specific. They connect to the drone as a type of part. The flight controller for some of these quick drones that sort of takes the radio input and steers the drone. The literal motor itself in terms of how it's wound and how it takes the batteries. And these are all the sorts of parts that just aren't getting the same attention in the U.S. that the suppliers right now are all out of China for this.
Right, so they're all out of China, but there's some legislation coming up in 2026. Talk to us about that legislation, how it will affect your business.
Oh yeah, this is a massive driver. It's called the American Securities Drone Act. It was passed as part of the defense budget by the U.S. government in December. What that says is by about January 2026, no federal dollars can be used to buy or operate a Chinese drone. To simplify it a little bit, if the Department of Transportation wants to inspect a highway right now, they go hire a company and they go fly a Chinese drone and give the data back. That company won't be able to take that contract because they won't even be able to use the money to pay the salary to fly the drone. And this is going to create just a massive changeover to U.S. manufacturing of drones and the U.S. purchase of drones that's going to require a supply chain that doesn't go through China.
Are there any dominant players now manufacturing in the U.S., these parts?
No, for some of these parts, nobody's making them in the U.S. right now. If you look at Teal Drone, Skydio, a lot of these companies, most of the motors, for instance, are coming out of China still because that's where the supply chain is.
Okay. So you're doing about $6 million in revenue now between the two divisions. Break that down. You've got the parts division and, again, the drones themselves. So break down the revenue.
Yeah, so we look at it as a retail channel and then the parts. And we're doing about $4.5 million through the retail channel, and that's been growing very quickly. And we're just starting to do B2B parts, and that's been about $2 million with our long-term branded parts. Okay. And we see that really being able to start to grow. Really short-term demand. You know, everybody talks about Ukraine and Russia. Ukraine saying they're going to build 1 million drones, Russia 2 million drones in 2024. They want to buy parts from everywhere. But then long term, the legislation is going to cause all the American manufacturers to need parts. So we see the ability to launch, scale, and then kind of carry forward to be this big tier one supplier.
So you've got basically a year and a half to position yourself as the dominant player for parts for drones in the U.S. What do you have to do to get there?
Go as fast as we can, build out supply chains. Absolutely have to focus on being cash flow positive, because I think any speculative or loss leaders are going to put us in a position where we'll get buried. And then start to really develop these relationships. What's really cool about this is if you look, Rotor Riot, which is one of the companies we have, they have this YouTube channel. And we had 4.5 million views last year, but everybody viewing it are the people that build their own drones. It turns out almost all the program managers at all the US companies all started as enthusiasts. So we even have really strong brands and a direct communication channel to the decision makers. And so it should be very easy to get a foot in the door and start as a second source.
Let's go back to geopolitical events. A lot of wars in the world. Ukraine's using drones. Will you sell into Ukraine, or do you now?
Yeah, we've sold stuff to charities that ship to Ukraine directly, to parts for people shipping over there. We see what they're doing and the new technology aspects, and particularly in that conflict, sort of defending Europe as being worthwhile. China sells to both sides, and one of the things the Ukrainian whole buying enterprise is concerned about is what if Russia buys everything China can make and there's no supply chain? And so they're as interested as domestic manufacturers in a diversified supply chain.
And you have purchase orders now with the Department of Defense, correct?
Yeah, we've had different U.S. government entities buy through our store just directly and place POs as they start to look at what can be done here, and good relationships with everybody there.
And you're also seeking the NDA approval?
Yeah, so if you look, NDAA compliance, which is National Defense Authorization Act, shows that you have to sort of source your stuff from non-entity countries. And so when we're looking at building out the supply chain and becoming this tier one supplier, we are absolutely developing it to avoid any of those even sub-assemblies that might come from places that would cause it to not be qualified for this U.S. purchase in 2026.
You raised $5 million on the IPO.
Yeah.
How far would that get you?
$5 million on the IPO will get us past 2 years.
Really?
We're really focused on cash flow. Our burn's low. Everything we're doing is cash flow focused.
Okay.
And that puts us into 2026. So we are comfortable, even where we're at, getting to the opportunity window.
What about an acquisition strategy?
We think it's actually super important to consider, and that's why we listed when we did. We're looking at companies that fit our model, either as additional channel or component providers, but we're focused on ones that are cash flow positive. So we think if we can go find a domestic motor company to partner with that may be doing something else and they're small, okay, boom, positive cash flow. Let's go bring them into the family. That type of thing, to be in a position to win the market. So if you think about it, if in 2026 everybody has to replace their drones, in 2025 all these other companies will be launching their next generation of product, which means we as a supplier need to be positioned to start to deliver mid-2025, and we need to have samples for them early 2025. And so I think if we're really disciplined and we maintain this cash flow notion to build a really effective business in this segment, then acquisitions can be a really important part of us getting there faster and just taking that dominant position.
Alan, let's talk about your background, why you joined the company.
Yeah, I don't know how far back you want to go, but coming into business for me was initially an accident. I got my PhD in engineering. I was an individual contributor, and I didn't understand why decisions were being made. And so I eventually tried to figure out and learn how to do it. But starting Navigant and then going to Fat Shark, had I known what it would entail, I probably would have never done it. So naivety got me going. And then really what I saw here, and why Unusual Machines, is this really big opportunity in sort of bringing everything back to the U.S. And that, to me, growing up in Michigan, seeing the automotive industry, seeing some of that go away and what it did to communities and to our country, I'm really excited to be able to bring back new technology and help sort of re-energize the manufacturing base in the country. I think because of that, we have a really great team. The head of the consumer division is Andrew Camden. He's also out of Michigan. He's been doing drones for a long time. We have a CFO that's been a CFO of multiple public companies. We just added an amazing board member, Sandy Rich, who is on the New York Pension Fund and is actually on the committee for the PCAOB. So we're seeing a lot of gravity to this in terms of just exceptional people that are signing up. It's actually very exciting.
On that note, in terms of the growth and your vision, you're coming out with some new products, these U.S.-made flight controllers, motors, et cetera. Talk to us about those new products coming online.
Yeah, we're putting in work to try to actually start to do what we say we're going to do. The first thing we expect to have is like one of the first-person view, the FPV, sort of the drones you see with all the helmets, a flight controller made in the U.S. We expect that to come back, and we got to test it and all that jazz. It might not work right away. Sometimes these things don't, but we hope to have that in the market in the next 2 or 3 months. Okay. And we expect uptake there from everybody flying these types of drones. Hopefully we can get some over to Europe too, where they need parts. And then as we're starting to explore ways to build motors, motor controllers, some of these other things that are really in demand. Okay. And then we're looking to go second source for people to help them build out redundancy of their supply chains. Okay. So next 6 months, you'll start to see new products hit the market, and we're hoping that people like them as much as we do.
Alan, we've covered a lot of territory today. What's the essential value proposition? Why should investors consider investing in the company today?
The American Securities Drone Act, passed in December, is going to wipe out all Chinese drones from any U.S. government money. This is going to create huge demand for U.S.-made drones. Those drone manufacturers, there are a lot of them, we've heard about a lot of them, they don't have a supply chain that's U.S. made. We're going to fill that first tier 1 supply chain, and that is going to be a massive market opportunity. What's even more valuable for today is, given the conflict in Ukraine and the demand for parts for millions of drones, we don't have to wait to 2026 to start to ship products that we're able to make in that diversified supply chain. And so this is getting started, and it's going to go really fast when it happens all at once, when that turns over.
So you're addressing today, just on the parts side for drones, a $17 billion market, again, growing to, analysts estimate, to $115 billion market by 2032. Again, you've got this legislation in 2026. You execute, and this is not a $25 million market cap stock. It's considerably more.
Well, you look at some other industries that are a little more mature, like the automotive industry, which works this way. Bosch is a tier 1 supplier. In the aerospace industry, Rolls-Royce is a tier 1 supplier. This is going to be regulated by the FAA. It's going to be that big, and the suppliers, because they're qualified, there's paperwork, they do everything, you don't change them. And so being there first means you grow with the entire industry rather than betting on one company or the other.
Alan, great being with you today.
Appreciate
Unusual Machines just IPO'd on the New York Stock Exchange. Now, to get more information on Unusual Machines, visit umacinfo.com. You'll find research profiles, presentations, the latest videos, all of your 10Ks, 10Qs, and press releases. And you can subscribe to email alerts for the company. You can also call us at 1-800-RedChip to speak to a specialist about the company. And remember, make sure you sign up for our free weekly newsletter, which is chock full of great small cap ideas. And also, again, make sure that you join our webinar series. You can find that, again, on our website under the Events tab. Again, visit redchip.com, subscribe to our newsletter today, sign up for our webinars, and you can also, again, order a copy of my book, Small Stocks, Big Money, which features interviews with some of the biggest players in the microcap space. Now let's go to the interview.
Hello, today with us we have Oren Hershkowitz, CEO of ENLIVEX Therapeutics, trading on the NASDAQ under the ticker ENLV. Oren, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Very happy to be here.
We're happy to have you. To start, Oren, could you give our audience a broad overview of ENLIVEX Therapeutics, focusing on your core technology and mission? Specifically, how does Allocetra, your universal off-the-shelf cell therapy, work to reprogram macrophages and address immune system imbalances?
Okay, so ENLIVEX is a cell therapy. It's what we call the next generation cell therapy company, right? It's the next generation because we're focusing on a new modality, as you mentioned, and that's the macrophages. Very, very important key regulator cell that we know how to reprogram. I'll explain in a second. But it's also developing off-the-shelf cell therapy, so very scalable and very cost-effective. So in that sense, what we're doing at ENLIVEX is using cells in order to target immune cells of the patients called macrophages. Macrophages are a key regulator of the immune cells. They're playing a role in housekeeping, but also in defense against pathogens and so on. However, in some conditions, they go out of control, okay? And they become part of the disease, part of the problem. And that's a very complicated situation to resolve. However, using Allocetra, using our platform, we know how to reprogram those macrophages back into homeostatic state. So we bring them back into controlled state, and they, as a consequence, they bring back the immune system back to balanced state.
Sounds fascinating, Oren. You're targeting some significant unmet medical needs with this macrophage reprogramming approach, which you just discussed. Can you discuss further the size of the market opportunities for your leading pipeline candidates, especially in the areas of sepsis and osteoarthritis? And how does the prevalence and impact of these conditions underscore the potential demand for Allocetra?
Right. So, this is a platform. Allocetra is really a platform. We can apply it in different conditions where macrophages are involved, right? So at the one hand, we have the sepsis. Sepsis is a huge, life-threatening, unmet medical condition where people are getting an infection from viruses or bacteria or whatever, but eventually it develops to a dysregulated immune response. So the immune trying to eliminate the pathogen goes out of control, macrophages goes out of control, there's a huge mess, and eventually that leads to non-specific organ damage, morbidity, mortality. So sepsis, really a huge unmet medical condition, is the third leading cause of mortality in hospitals in the US, right? We're talking about more than $30 billion market. And that's on the one hand. And the other one is actually this chronic, life debilitating condition, which is osteoarthritis. It's a joint, low-grade inflammation that leads to eventually a lot of pain and disability, loss of function, and at the end of that, usually a knee replacement therapy, knee replacement surgery. So that's, again, there's really poor treatments today. And we understand now that macrophages are emerging target in osteoarthritis. And this is exactly where Allocetra fits in perfectly. It's about a $9 to $10 billion market. Again, a very, very large market. In this case, we're injecting Allocetra directly into the joint, whereas in sepsis, it's a systemic exposure. So you have very different indications, very different conditions using this platform.
Oren, could you elaborate on ENLIVEX's current clinical pipeline? You have a phase 2b trial for sepsis and a phase 1/2 trial in osteoarthritis. What are the primary endpoints of these trials, and what upcoming milestones can investors look forward to over the next 12 to 18 months?
Sure. So let's start with sepsis. First of all, we've completed already a phase 1b study. We treated 10 septic patients, moderate septic patients. We gave them Allocetra on top of standard of care, and all of those 10 patients recovered swiftly and discharged from the hospital with no residual disease. We've compared that to a historical control group where we had 27% mortality. So small study, but very, very promising data. Following which, we've opened a randomized, controlled, blinded, multi-center, multi-country study, and we've announced the completion of the recruitment for that study end of last year. So we've completed recruitment of 120 severe, moderate to severe septic patients. This is the target population that we're projecting eventually that will receive Allocetra, assuming we get an approval at the end of this process. And endpoints of this study, we're talking about scoring of organ dysfunction. We're talking about 28 days all-cause mortality, vasopressor-free days, classical sepsis efficacy endpoint, and obviously safety as well. This is within the sepsis study. Now, the phase 1/2 study in osteoarthritis, we actually have two studies. The first one is an investigator-initiated trial study. It's ongoing already. We announced the dosing of the first patient. This is for patients that are already indicated for knee replacement surgery. So we give them alopecia in lieu of that surgery, and we follow their pain and their willingness to go through the surgery, So this is an open label, it's ongoing, and we'll probably have data. It's about 12 patients in that study, maybe even a little bit more. We'll probably have data end of Q3 this year. But the bigger study is the company-sponsored study that we initiated just now. We've announced the first regulatory approval for that study. It's actually a phase 1/2 study, but the phase 1 is like a safety run-in, and the phase 2 part of it is a randomized, controlled, statistically powered study to show differences in pain between alopecia treated group and controlled group. So again, we're talking about knee osteoarthritis patient. In this case, we're talking about kind of a moderate to severe patients, which is the largest segment of those patients. And we're giving them several injections of alopecia or placebo, and we're following their pain for 3 months, 6 months, and even up to 12 months. And the top line data from that study will be Q3 25. So if I'm summarizing all of those clinical endpoints, just to to help everybody to kind of consolidate all of this. So we have the sepsis data, the top line data from the phase 2. We're expecting to get that data first, second week of April. So just around the corner. Okay. The second one from the osteoarthritis in the second year of 24, and this year we'll have some data from the open label studies that I've described. And in 25, Q3, we'll have the top line data from the phase 2 randomized controlled study. So we're talking about several potential inflection points. And we are well funded to cover all of those activities, actually all the way to 25.
Good to know, Oren. And you've been talking about this relatively short regulatory approval pathway, particularly in Europe, which could enable post-phase 2 marketing approval in sepsis. Can you explain this specialized regulation and how it positions ENLIVEX for potentially accelerated market access compared to traditional pathways?
Sure. So, for life-threatening unmet medical condition, there should be, and there is, an accelerated pathway because we want to bring life-saving drugs to patients as fast as possible, right? So basically, you need to check the box about an unmet medical condition, which sepsis is. It's a life-threatening condition, which is definitely the case. And you need to show really good data to get this accelerated approval. So, as a caveat, this is subjective to the results. But assuming that, and hopefully if we get very positive data, this regulatory pathway allows you to get a conditional approval where you can actually start commercializing the drug, but in parallel to do kind of a confirmatory phase 3 study. So it's definitely an accelerated approval. It's a very important regulatory pathway. We'll see the data, and we're hopeful that it will allow us to pursue that specific pathway.
Finally, for our investor audience, could you give us the essential value proposition behind ENLIVEX Therapeutics? Why should investors take an interest in your company right now?
Well, I think we've kind of talked about it throughout this interview, but I'll try to summarize. So first of all, I think that, technology. It's a very novel modality of reprogramming macrophage. I think ENLIVEX is the only company that knows how to do that. Second, it's not just a cell therapy, but it's a next generation cell therapy, an off-the-shelf drug, very cost effective, so scalable, can be commercialized quite easily, and so on. That's the second thing. The third thing is that we have a very diverse pipeline. Unmet medical conditions, whether it's life-threatening or life-debilitating conditions, huge markets where there is really a need for a novel approach, and this is what we do. On top of that, we're talking about a very experienced management, and that's obviously important. And I think also we didn't talk about this too much, but ENLIVEX has a very plain vanilla capital structure, no debt, $30 million. It could take us all the way to the end of 25, several inflection points in different indications. And I think if you sum all of this up, it's really a very good value proposition.
That is a very interesting story, Oren. Thank you for sharing it with us today.
Thank you very much for having me. It was great talking to you.
Now, to get more information on ENLIVEX Therapeutics, visit enlvinfo.com. You'll find research profiles, presentations, fact sheets, the 10Qs, 10Ks, the press releases, and you can subscribe to email alerts to stay on top of the latest news of ENLIVEX. Give us a call also at 1-800-RedChip, and you can speak to a specialist about the company. Now, let's recap the companies featured today. First, you met Unusual Machines on the New York Stock Exchange, a fast-growing company of drone parts. You also met ENLIVEX Therapeutics. Again, this is a biotech company, and we're looking at phase 2 data on a technology that treats sepsis. Again, if you have any questions about any of our public companies featured today, call us at 1-800-RedChip or email us at info@redchip.com. And visit the landing pages as well that we put on the screen for you. And remember, while small caps can provide significant gains, you must be prepared for the downside. Small caps are among the most volatile asset class. And most of the companies featured on the show are RedChip client companies, and we may own stock in these companies. So please always read our disclosures at redchip.com. Also, go to our website and sign up for our webinar series. These are a series of CEO presentations from dozens and dozens of companies through the course of the year. And sign up for our newsletter at redchip.com. Thanks for being with us today. We'll see you next week with some new exciting emerging growth companies.